The shovel didn't just hit dirt, it hit a pressurized pipe. The hiss of water bursting from the line was loud enough to make the worker jump back, flinging mud all over his neon vest. A split second later, a geyser of water shot straight into the air, soaking the clipboard of a middle-aged woman in oversized sunglasses and a blinding pink visor. That woman was Karen, president of the Willow Ridge HOA. And in that moment, she had no idea she'd just declared war on the wrong neighbor. I was standing 20 feet away, hose in hand, frozen in place, as I watched my front lawn get dissected by a crew that didn't even knock. They were cutting through my irrigation like it was a jungle they'd been ordered to clear. But the kicker, I had a legally recorded easement and a secret backup line running under their prized brick sidewalk. Karen had just opened a water fight she wasn't ready for. It all started 3 days earlier, when I noticed the sprinklers on the west end of my lawn weren't kicking in. At first, I thought it was just a clog or maybe a busted timer. I fiddled with the controller, adjusted the valves, even replaced a head or two. Nothing. Then I walked the line, following it along the edge of my property where it paralleled a community pathway maintained by the HOA. That's when I saw the first trench. Fresh dirt, tire tracks, orange spray paint on the grass like some kind of territorial claim. And standing triumphantly in the middle of it all was Karen, barking instructions to two guys in fluorescent shirts as they tossed shovel after shovel of my topsoil onto a wheelbarrow like they were exhuming treasure. They weren't contractors. There were no ID tags, no permits, no posted notice, just a smug woman waving a clipboard like it was some kind of holy scroll. I asked what they were doing. Karen didn't even look at me at first. She simply said, "You've got unapproved underground features encroaching on HOA-managed land. We're removing them. Consider this a courtesy." When I told her she was standing on my side of the easement line, she scoffed. "This isn't your easement. It's our common use buffer zone." I tried reasoning, even pulled out a survey map I kept rolled in my garage cabinet. She wouldn't even glance at it. "If you have concerns, you're welcome to submit them in writing to the board," she said, already turning away. The next day, my lawn looked like a World War I battlefield, trenches cut through flower beds, water pooled near the boxwoods like someone had burst a hydrant. My drip lines were slashed, my mulch was piled in sloppy mounds, and the worst part? They hadn't just disconnected me from the irrigation, they'd cut through the line that also routed water runoff from the rear slope. That runoff was designed to keep pressure off my retaining wall without it, a heavy rain could shift the whole structure. That night I went into the attic, dragged down a dust-covered banker's box and opened it at the dining table like I was cracking a safe. Inside were maps, surveys, letters from the original developer, and one particularly juicy legal document, a recorded utility easement from 1996, signed and notarized, granting me the right to install and maintain irrigation and runoff infrastructure across the buffer zone. Not only that, but it also included a contingency clause allowing a secondary route beneath the adjoining HOA-maintained sidewalk in the event of primary line failure or obstruction. I chuckled, then laughed, then nearly cried with joy. I had a secret weapon. Karen had just triggered the backup clause without realizing. I waited until morning, let her finish her little ceremony of dragging around orange cones and admiring her mud-covered destruction. I approached with the easement in hand. "I believe you've made a mistake," I said, keeping my voice polite. She looked at the document like it was a used tissue. "We've consulted our bylaws," she replied. "This landscaping zone is under our jurisdiction." I smiled. "Karen, this was signed before your bylaws even existed. The HOA didn't exist in '96. She bristled. "You're free to challenge it legally. In the meantime, we've issued you a fine for non-compliance, $2,500, 0 cents. She handed me a printout stapled to a flyer about HOA landscaping standards. I didn't even flinch. I just said, "Perfect, I'll add it to the lawsuit." That afternoon, I made one call to my friend Nate, a contractor who owed me a favor after I helped him with a major data recovery job last year. We spent the next 4 hours using a GPR scanner to confirm the backup irrigation route, which, sure enough, snaked under the sidewalk Karen loved to brag about during community walkthroughs. Nate grinned. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked. "You could just let it go." I didn't even blink. Let it go? They dug up my livelihood and billed me for it? Nah, let's tap the backup. By sunset the next day, I had full pressure again without touching a single inch of their landscaping. I routed water through the backup and capped the old line. Karen had no clue. In fact, when she noticed my lawn greening up again, she sent another fine accusing me of unauthorized water access. I framed it next to my easement and watered my roses while humming the theme to a courtroom drama. But I wasn't done. The real fun was about to begin, because Karen had no idea what happens when you dig up a trench without calling utility locate. And her sidewalk? Oh, it was about to start leaking in more ways than one. The next morning started with an odd kind of calm, the kind you only feel when you know something big is about to tip over. I woke up early, poured myself a cup of coffee, and stepped outside to the quiet hiss of my sprinklers doing their thing like clockwork. They arced over the lawn in perfect symmetry, soaking the grass that had been nearly choked to death just days ago. The best part? Every drop of that water was flowing through the backup line Karen didn't even know existed. From the sidewalk, you couldn't see a thing. No trenches, no hoses, no exposed valves. It was clean, quiet, and entirely legal. But beneath that polished brick sidewalk she cherished so much was now a live water route, humming with the soft push of pressurized flow. She had started this with her careless trenching, and I had simply followed the path she unknowingly activated. Later that day, I had Nate come back with a fresh batch of materials. We weren't just going to re-establish the irrigation, we were going to fortify it. If the HOA wanted to make this a turf war, I was going to make sure my turf was impenetrable. We installed a subtle valve box hidden beneath a decorative stone slab near the edge of the property, a kind of secret switch to control the new backup line without needing to touch the original one at all. Nate chuckled as he adjusted the pressure gauge and watched the numbers stabilize. "You know," he said, "this is probably the cleanest sabotage job I've ever done." I shook my head and smirked. It's not sabotage if it's backed by a notarized easement. Karen, of course, wasn't content to leave things alone. That afternoon, I got a letter stuffed in my mailbox. No postage, just crammed in like a hate note. The HOA was officially issuing a second fine, this time for unauthorized activation of subterranean utilities without HOA clearance. They really were making it up as they went. I laughed aloud and tossed the letter in the fire pit. They couldn't touch me legally, not with the document I had. Still, it was only a matter of time before Karen tried something bolder. Sure enough, the next morning a new sign appeared on the sidewalk next to the flower bed trench. Temporary fencing, caution tape, and a freshly laminated HOA notice stating, "Future beautification zone, community flower installation underway, no private access." It was a power move designed to make the area look like an official project site, but what it really did was draw attention to their mistake. The pathway looked ridiculous, like a construction site in a middle-class garden, complete with bright orange cones and a glaring lack of any actual flowers. Curious neighbors started asking questions. Why was there tape across the sidewalk? What happened to the irrigation lines? Why were people receiving notices about community beautification when there had been no vote or newsletter announcement? I didn't even have to answer. Karen's arrogance was doing the heavy lifting. She had turned a passive HOA drama into a public curiosity, and all I had to do was keep watering my garden and watching it thrive. And then came the first surprise twist. Karen accused me of tapping into the community water supply. She claimed I had illegally rerouted HO water into my system, that I was leeching off shared resources. It was the boldest lie she'd tried yet, and she even marched over with a clipboard and a self-appointed compliance officer from the board. Some poor guy named Leonard who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. They demanded to inspect my irrigation controller. I told them I'd be happy to oblige if they came back with a court order or a utility inspector present. Karen's face turned the color of a boiled beet. Leonard mumbled something about miscommunication and quietly backed away. Karen stormed off, but not before shouting over her shoulder, "This isn't over!" And she was right, it wasn't, because 2 days later, her little sidewalk project experienced an unexpected development. The sprinkler pressure in her newly marked flower zone suddenly dropped to a dribble. Plants they'd just planted started to wilt. The board tried turning off the main valve to the area, thinking it was a blockage. What they didn't know was that while they were out digging up lines and ignoring permits, they had inadvertently broken a cap that allowed groundwater to shift under the brick. The sidewalk started to settle unevenly. Then came the first crack. I noticed it during my morning walk. One of the HOA board members was crouched near the edge of the sidewalk, running a finger along a jagged line that had formed between two bricks. He looked puzzled, then concerned. I strolled past and casually remarked, "Might be due to water displacement from unauthorized trenching. Shifting soil's a tricky thing." He looked up at me like I'd just revealed the secret to the universe. I kept walking, whistling all the way home. The sidewalk wasn't the only thing cracking. At the next HOA board meeting, word had clearly spread. Residents were fed up. The budget was stretched thin. No one had voted on this supposed beautification project. And now there was a visible liability risk, with the sidewalk breaking apart. Karen tried to spin it into a story about negligent homeowner landscaping interfering with community property, but the murmurs in the room turned into low boos. Someone asked why there had been no prior notices. Someone else brought up the easement. I didn't even have to speak. The crowd was already doing the work for me. Later that evening, I sat with Nate on the back patio, enjoying a beer while the new irrigation ran smoothly in the background. The garden looked even better than before, vibrant, lush, practically glowing under the twilight sky. Nate raised his bottle and said, "To invisible victories." I clinked mine against his, and to backup plans Karen can't touch. But I wasn't done yet. I had a quiet little plan of my own brewing. Something subtle, something Karen wouldn't see coming until it was too late. I had one more ace up my sleeve, and it was buried, not in the ground, but in the laws she kept pretending didn't apply. The war she started wasn't just about water anymore. It was about control, and I was about to remind her that control, when built on a cracked foundation, always collapses. The chaos started small, almost poetic. A single sprinkler head along the HOA's central garden strip began sputtering like it had the hiccups, spitting out muddy droplets instead of a clean arc. Residents walking by paused and stared, whispering about how strange it was that the newly renovated area already looked worse than before. A week ago, Karen had been parading through the neighborhood with a whistle in her mouth and a clipboard full of fines. Now she was stuck on her hands and knees, fiddling with pipes and frantically digging through mulch, trying to figure out why her community upgrade was turning into a soggy disaster. From my porch swing, iced tea in hand, I watched the show with a grin hidden behind a raised newspaper. If only she knew that the water beneath her sidewalk, the one she had confidently torn through, was now the very thing feeding my garden and undermining hers. Karen, of course, never admitted she was wrong. She doubled down, like all good tyrants do. One morning, I saw a new addition to the HOA lamppost directly across from my lawn. A small, shiny dome camera aimed right at my property. It looked like one of those cheap surveillance cameras you could get in bulk online. Still, I played along. I walked out, waved cheerfully to the camera, and watered my plants with exaggerated movements, like I was in a gardening commercial. Then I went inside, fired up my laptop, and found the camera's unsecured Wi-Fi signal faster than it took Karen to print another violation notice. The feed was laughably low res, but I had an idea. I rerouted the stream to a loop of squirrel footage from my backyard, including one particularly fat squirrel attempting to ride a rotating sprinkler head like a rodeo bull. By the time Karen checked her footage, she'd think my biggest crime was running an unauthorized rodent circus. Then came the real surprise. A white county truck pulled into the neighborhood, parked right at the entrance to the so-called beautification zone. Out stepped a utility inspector with a hard hat, clipboard, and a face that said he was not here for tea and cookies. Apparently, someone had filed a formal complaint regarding unlawful tampering with irrigation systems tied to municipal runoff control. I wondered who could have done such a thing, but only allowed for dramatic effect. The inspector knocked on my door, and I greeted him with a folder of documents already in hand: my easement, dated maps, original plans from the subdivision's developer, and recent photos of Karen's unauthorized dig. His eyes widened slightly as he scanned the paperwork. "You've been ready for this, haven't you?" I shrugged and said, "Let's just say I saw the flood coming." As it turned out, not only had Karen's crew violated the boundaries of my easement, but they had also compromised a critical water diversion trench that funneled runoff safely away from multiple properties during storms. Tampering with that system could have resulted in backyard flooding and soil destabilization for 3 neighboring homes. The inspector wasn't amused. He walked the entire site with me, noting every broken pipe, misaligned trench, and potential code violation. I even showed him the photos I'd taken when the workers were actively digging, without utility markings or locate flags. That alone could trigger multiple citations. When Karen saw the inspector walking her turf with a pen behind his ear and a measuring wheel in hand, she rushed out like she was still in control. "Is there a problem?" she asked with her trademark condescension. Inspector didn't even look up. "Several, actually. You'll be receiving formal documentation soon. This appears to be an unpermitted excavation that violated at least 3 local utility codes." She sputtered something about HOA authority and community planning, but the inspector cut her off. "Easements and public utility rights supersede HOA landscaping plans. You should have checked with the county before digging." For once, Karen had no clever comeback, just the color draining from her face as she realized she was now the subject of the investigation. The fallout came fast. The HOA board was blindsided. At the next community meeting, Karen tried to spin the issue as miscommunication with the landscaping committee, but the residents weren't buying it. Leonard, the poor compliance officer she'd dragged into her earlier scheme, resigned mid-meeting. He didn't even finish his statement, just stood up, said, "I'm out," and walked away. The remaining board members stared at Karen like she had suddenly turned radioactive. Someone finally asked the question everyone was thinking. "Why didn't we vote on this project before spending community funds?" Another chimed in, "And why are we now liable for utility violations?" Karen tried redirecting the heat by accusing me of escalating things unnecessarily. "He filed the complaint. He's sabotaging community harmony," she barked. I calmly stood up and held out a copy of the violation letter I'd received earlier, the one she issued when she first dug through my line. "You fined me for using my legal infrastructure," I said, my voice steady. "You dug without permits, ignored utility law, damaged a county-managed runoff system, and now you're blaming me for the consequences." Silence followed. No one backed her, not even the usual HOA loyalists. She was unraveling. A few nights later, I noticed movement near the sidewalk. Karen had hired a separate crew, no uniforms, no markings, and they were digging again, under the cover of darkness, trying to rebury the now sagging sidewalk and cover up the trench damage. It was sloppy and clearly unlicensed. I didn't interfere. I simply turned my front-facing security cameras to capture everything in HD. 2 days later, I emailed the footage to the county inspector, along with timestamps, GPS coordinates, and links to Karen's earlier claims that all work had ceased. It wasn't long before a citation arrived, then another. The sidewalk was deemed a liability zone. The county ordered it fenced off until a licensed repair was completed, and a formal investigation was opened into HOA misuse of funds. Karen didn't show her face for a week. Her nameplate was removed from the HOA newsletter, no announcements, just a quiet vanishing act. But I knew better than to think it was over. People like Karen don't retreat without planning a comeback. So I prepared my final move. Not as retaliation, but as reinforcement. I pulled out the full archive I'd compiled: HOA letters, photos, recorded board meetings, drone shots of the sidewalk damage, inspection reports, timestamps of dig activity, and a full copy of my easement. It wasn't just a defense, it was a case file, and if she ever tried to swing again, I'd make sure she tripped over every single lie she'd built her empire on. The best part? My garden never looked better. Every rose, every hedge, every perfect blade of grass was now fed by the very system Karen tried to destroy, and it was thriving. Quietly, persistently, beautifully, right beneath her crumbling authority. The sidewalk gave way on a Wednesday morning. It wasn't dramatic at first, just a slow buckling, like the ground was exhaling. A soft crack followed. Then a crooked line spidered across the bricks, right outside Karen's beloved beautification zone. By mid-afternoon, one side of the sidewalk had dipped a full 2 inches lower than the other, and rainwater from the previous night had pooled in the recess like a miniature trench. A kid riding a scooter tried to cross it and nearly flipped over. His mom screamed, and within an hour the county had returned with warning tape and orange cones. The HOA tried to blame soil erosion. I knew better. It was the result of unpermitted trenching, cut water lines, and poor backfill work. It was a slow collapse, one Karen had unknowingly engineered herself. I watched it all unfold from my porch, sipping black coffee as the inspectors made their rounds. I didn't need to say a word. My silence was louder than any accusation. Neighbors began connecting the dots without my help. They knew Karen had overseen the sidewalk project. They remembered the rushed digging, the lack of a community vote, the sudden burst pipes, and the repeated fines she'd handed out without warning. By now, people were talking in driveways, during dog walks, at the community mailbox. Her power was crumbling, like the very sidewalk she had insisted on replacing. The HOA board was scrambling. With Karen avoiding the public eye, acting president Alan Thompson, an anxious, balding accountant who clearly wanted no part in this mess, called for an emergency board meeting. I received an invitation, hand-delivered by a teenager in an HOA shirt who looked like he'd been paid in soda and snacks. The note was overly formal, asking for clarification regarding your water utility installation and associated permits. I knew it was code for, "Please don't sue us into oblivion." So I showed up. The meeting was held at the community clubhouse. Folding chairs were lined up in crooked rows. A projector sat unused in the corner, and a stale tray of cookies occupied a plastic table no one dared touch. Residents filled the seats quickly, more than usual. The atmosphere was tense but buzzing, with the energy of a reckoning. Alan stood behind the podium, visibly sweating, trying to maintain some semblance of order. He stammered through introductions, apologized for the misunderstandings, and then cleared his throat before addressing the elephant in the room. "We understand there may have been some confusion regarding utility rights and easement lines during the recent landscaping improvements," he said, avoiding eye contact. "We'd like to invite Mr. Blake to share his documentation so we can resolve this matter with full transparency." I stood slowly, pulling a thin black binder from under my chair. Inside were copies of my legal easement, photos of the original dig site, timestamps of trench work, and, most damning, the nighttime footage of Karen's crew illegally covering the sidewalk damage. I laid each item on the folding table one by one, explaining without drama or gloating. I simply told the story. My irrigation line had been cut, a backup line activated under my legal right, and the subsequent damage was due to trenching done in violation of both county code and the easement. When I played the nighttime footage of the crew sneaking in to patch things up, a collective gasp rippled through the room. Karen's face appeared in the footage, holding a flashlight, directing the workers like some covert operation commander. It was irrefutable. Alan cleared his throat again, his face pale. "I think we need to take a vote on how to proceed," he said. There were murmurs, then hands raised, first for suspending Karen from the board, then for launching a formal inquiry into HOA spending, and finally for approaching me to negotiate a settlement that would keep this from escalating into court. Each motion passed without resistance. That night, Alan called me personally. He sounded tired and embarrassed. "We'd like to make things right," he said. "The board is prepared to cover all damages to your irrigation, repave the sidewalk correctly, and issue a formal apology. We just ask that you drop any formal legal complaints." Lee and I agreed on one condition. I wanted new language written into the HOA charter requiring board members to undergo utility and land easement training before making infrastructure decisions. Alan was stunned but agreed. He said it was probably the smartest thing anyone had proposed in years. Construction began the next week. Licensed contractors showed up with marked trucks, official permits, and the kind of professionalism Karen's trench crew had sorely lacked. They pulled up the damaged sidewalk, replaced it with a new one that included access panels and signage clearly marking the utility easement. The irrigation line was updated with better pressure regulators, and I even got a new runoff trench at the base of my yard with county oversight. What had started as a nightmare was now turning into an upgrade, and all without me lifting a shovel. On the final day of construction, I hosted a small gathering in my yard. Nothing flashy, just burgers, cold drinks, and a chalkboard sign that read, "What are you waiting for? Let's celebrate." Neighbors came in droves. Some apologized for staying quiet. Others shook my hand and thanked me for standing up to the board. One older couple even brought me a homemade pie and whispered, "You did what we always wanted to, but never could." Karen, of course, didn't attend. Her name had vanished from the HOA directory. No forwarding address, no farewell email. It was as if she'd been scrubbed clean from the neighborhood, a ghost haunting her own failure. Word around the block was she'd moved 2 towns over, into a community without an HOA. The irony was almost too perfect. I should have felt triumphant, but what I really felt was relief. The whole thing hadn't been about revenge. Not really. It had been about holding the line, literally and figuratively. I had something worth protecting, my home, my land, my water, and I'd refuse to let anyone dig it up without a fight. In the end, that fight didn't require fists or lawyers or threats, just facts, patience, and the ability to outthink a woman who thought power came from a clipboard. As the sun dipped low over the backyard, sprinklers rose up and hissed in synchronized precision, casting golden arcs across the lawn. Kids laughed, adults toasted, and I sat on my porch swing watching it all with quiet satisfaction. The war was over, the field reclaimed, and beneath it all ran the line that started it. Still humming, still strong, still mine. The new sidewalk gleamed under the morning sun, perfectly level, professionally finished, and built with care this time. No cracks, no sudden dips, no cheap patchwork trying to hide a mess beneath. Along its edge, embedded in polished stone, was a small but permanent plaque that read, "Community Easement Line, maintained in partnership with homeowners." It wasn't loud, it wasn't boastful, but it was there and it was mine. It marked the place where my quiet victory had been sealed, not with a bang, but with patient persistence and well-timed truth. Every time someone walked that stretch, they were stepping over the very line Karen had tried to erase from history. Only now it was carved into it. In the weeks that followed the sidewalk reconstruction, things around the neighborhood settled into a rhythm that felt almost too peaceful. The HOA board had gone quiet, holding fewer meetings and issuing fewer notices. Most of the old guard had either resigned or stopped showing up altogether. A younger, more reasonable group had stepped in, led by none other than Leonard, the former compliance officer who had once been Karen's unwilling sidekick. He approached me one afternoon while I was pruning my roses, awkward but sincere. He thanked me for sticking to the facts, for not blowing everything up when I easily could have. "We were all caught in her storm," he said. "You showed us how to get out of it." I didn't need praise. but I appreciated it. What mattered more to me was that the easement was safe, the irrigation was stronger than ever, and no one dared touch my property without knocking and asking first. In a way, Karen's drama had earned me something I never expected in a planned community. Respect. Not the loud kind that comes from yelling at HOA meetings or putting up protest signs, but the quiet kind. The type that shows in nods from neighbors, in small waves from passing cars, in kids playing on your lawn because they know it's the softest grass in the cul-de-sac. But just when I thought Karen was gone for good, a new flyer appeared on the community bulletin board outside the clubhouse. It had no HOA logo and no official formatting, but its tone was unmistakable. It accused the board of corruption, claimed backdoor deals were being made to favor certain homeowners, and most notably, warned that residents should beware of individuals exploiting loopholes to control HOA infrastructure. It was signed only with a single letter, K. It didn't take a genius to figure out who was behind it. Karen had resurfaced. Not physically, but through paper and paranoia. She was trying to stir the pot from the shadows, hoping to rally a few loyalists or confused residents who still believed in her brand of rule by clipboard. The board dismissed the flyer as baseless and unauthorized. But I knew Karen better than they did. She wouldn't just go away quietly. She'd test the fences, look for cracks. So I made sure there were none. First, I compiled a full digital archive of the easement case. Photos, documents, inspection letters, timestamps, video footage, even the original developer's notarized map. I uploaded it to a secure site and gave access to the new board. I also shared it with the county utility office and filed it under my home's property record, with a lawyer's help, ensuring it was accessible to any future buyer, inspector, or official. Karen could try to rewrite history all she wanted. I'd already carved mine in stone and backed it with data. Then I did something a bit more fun. I commissioned a local metal artist to create a small garden sculpture in honor of the victory. It sat on a pedestal near my rose bushes, shaped like a coiled garden hose that transformed into a steel fist holding a spade. Beneath it, on a plaque of weathered brass, it read, "Defend what's yours, water finds its way." It wasn't gaudy, it wasn't in your face, but the message was clear, and people noticed. Some laughed, some asked for a closer look, and a few just smiled knowingly. Everyone got the point. Despite Karen's flyer campaign, nothing stuck. The community had seen too much. They knew the story now. How she had dug where she wasn't supposed to, ignored permits, tried to bury her mistakes, and got caught in the act. She wasn't feared anymore. She was a cautionary tale. A former tyrant now reduced to anonymous complaints and rambling Word documents posted on telephone poles. Even those disappeared eventually, taken down by residents before the board could even bother. The HOA wasn't perfect, but it was healing, and Karen, for all her fury, no longer had a platform. A few months later, I received an unexpected letter, not from the HOA or the county, but from the mayor's office. It was a formal recognition thanking me for upholding civic responsibility, environmental stewardship, and infrastructure awareness in the face of neighborhood disputes. There was even an invitation to attend a small town hall award ceremony. I didn't want a spotlight, but I went anyway, mostly for the humor of it. When they called my name and handed me a little plaque, I thought of that moment Karen first waved her clipboard at me, smug and certain, standing in the trench of my destroyed irrigation line. It felt like years ago. I brought the plaque home and stuck it in the garage next to the old documents I no longer needed to reference. Everything was calm now. My garden was thriving. The community was peaceful, and I had earned a kind of quiet security no fine or letter could take away. People walked the new sidewalk every day, passing over the invisible lines they once tried to erase, now acknowledged and protected. The water ran where it needed to, exactly how it was designed, without interference, without drama. Sometimes I wondered if Karen ever drove by, just to look. Maybe she did. Maybe she saw the new landscaping, the plaque and the stone, the sculpture in the garden. Maybe she sat behind the wheel, fuming, whispering that it should have gone differently. But deep down, she knew. She started a war, thinking it would be over in days. She didn't realize I'd already won it before the first trench was dug. Not because I fought harder, but because I knew the ground I stood on better than she ever did. And that made all the difference.